You know the legend, you know the hits, and you know the dance moves. You might know his influence on other artists, but do you know about the story? Do you know about the humble beginnings? Do you know about the musical culture that shaped him? What if I told you that the legend was never destined to become one? The story I'm about to narrate is anything but typical. It is the story of a man who transformed humiliation into triumph, who rose through the brutal hierarchy of a conservative musical landscape and went on to conquer the world. So buckle up, grab your popcorn, and listen closely, because this is about to be
gonna be big, very big, very big.
Hello, welcome to the Botengu channel. How can I describe my content? Well, when I'm not making videos about music theory or of myself playing, I am using this channel as a way to reflect on what makes black musical cultures similar and also what makes each of them unique. Do not hesitate to like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more. As I was making this video, I realized that a brief geography lesson will be helpful. In Central Africa, there are two countries named Congo. You have the Republic of Congo, whose capital is Brazzaville, and you have the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is also known as Congo-Kinshasa. The DRC was formerly called Belgian Congo and later renamed Zaire. It then eventually became the Democratic Republic of Congo. In this video, I will use the names Congo, Zaire, and DRC in an interchangeable way. When referring to the Republic of Congo, I will explicitly say Congo-Brazzaville. Both countries share closely related musical cultures anyway. Awilo was born Albert Louis William Longomba in Kinshasa on May 5, 1962, in the newly decolonized Congo. In many ways, it feels as though his family was destined for greatness. His father, Vicky Longomba, was a co-founder in the 50s of the legendary band OK Jazz, alongside none other than Franco. And yes, the same Franco who made the world dance to Mario in the mid-80s. Awilo's sister would later give birth to Claude Makelele, the French football legend and one of the best defensive midfielders in history. Awilo is also the uncle of the famous Kenyan duo, the Longombas. Awilo grew up with his grandmother, and every chance he got, he found ways to engage with music, tapping rhythms with sticks on any surface he could find. In the process, he sharpened his ear and developed his craft. Awilo was also known for his eccentric, comedic personality, something that would serve him remarkably well later in life. However, all of this had to be done in secret. His parents did not want him to become a musician. Despite the irony, his father being a musician himself, this was actually quite typical in the region. Parents often viewed music as an unstable career path, one associated with troublemakers or people who lacked discipline. Awilo had an habit of following an older member of his neighborhood, the Matetes neighborhood, one of Kinshasa's communes. Awilo recalls attending a neighborhood party when he was about 10 or 11 years old. The drummer for the band that was playing had stepped away to go to the bathroom. So the mentor, who had brought Awilo there, asked the band to let his young mentee play. But when Awilo tried, the drum set was too wide for his small body. He couldn't keep the rhythm. People started making fun of him, laughing at his failed attempt. In that moment, Awilo swore that he would continue working on his craft so that one day he could get his payback and prove those who mocked him wrong. Regardless of the obstacles, Awilo pushed forward and began playing with various bands until he eventually caught the attention of more established groups. Examples of such bands included Molengi Show, Manese Ibaba Fasol. An acquaintance of his was the guitarist for a group called Les Stukas, and he would pass by Awilo's place whenever he was heading to rehearsals. Since the band's former drummer had left, he invited Awilo to come along and try out. Awilo saw this as a valuable stepping stone. Les Stukas, led by the charismatic Lita Bembo, offered great visibility that could help him get noticed by more established bands. It is unclear when he adopted his stage name, but it is believed to have come from condensing the first syllables of his three given names. Interestingly, the results sounded distinctly more African. Whether intentional or not, this aligned with the broader cultural trend of the time. During the early 70s, Mobutu's policy of recours à l'authenticité encouraged and in many cases pressured citizens to embrace and highlight their traditional heritage as a response to the lingering effects of colonization. Foreign music was banned, pushing artists to draw inspiration from local traditions. Traditional ballet and folkloric elements became prominent, and musicians were urged to adopt more African-sounding names. Franco, for instance, became widely known as Luambo Makiadi. This is also the era when one artist, once known as Jules Presley, transformed into Papa Wemba. And it was Papa Wemba's band, Viva la Musica, that Awilo would join in the mid-80s. And he joined exactly at the right moment. Papa Wemba was actively seeking opportunities to expand his notoriety beyond the borders of Zaire. Soon came the Japan tour, followed by several European tours, opening new horizons for everyone involved in the band. Like many musicians in the group, Awilo quickly recognized the opportunities Europe offered. Although he was officially a member of Viva la Musica, he began playing with numerous other bands as well. This was quite typical of the late 80s. The strict band structure that existed since the 50s in the Belgian Congo, which was renamed Zaire in the early 70s, where interband collaboration, also known as zongzing, was strongly frowned upon, gradually gave way to a more flexible, almost mercenary-style musical environment among the Zairian diaspora centered in the Paris region. Instead of one band recording its own album from start to finish, artists would assemble their preferred musician and simply book studio sessions. Tours worked the same way. Whoever needed a band would gather available musicians. It was in this very dynamic setting that Awilo, who had already made a name for himself as a standout drummer, found himself collaborating with artists such as Teddy Soukami on his album Trop Bon Trop Couillon, Banzaka, in 1988, Zita Ninel on the Makori Gazuel album that came out the same year, which contains one of my favorite songs. I used to have this song on repeat when I was young. I would fall asleep to it and wake up to it. I was a fan. And to know that Awilo was the one playing the drums, it's actually pretty mesmerizing. He also collaborated with another artist named Damien Aziwa on his album Soukouzuk, Deuxième Épisode, which appeared the same year. He was also featured on Jean Piwablé album, which appeared the next year in 1989. The death of a system can be quiet, but more often it is not. And its collapse affects everyone who participates in it, whether they want to transition or not. As European promoters began requesting smaller, more efficient bands, tension grew within Viva la Musica. Many musicians had joined Papa Wemba's group specifically because it offered a pathway to Europe, and competition quickly intensified within the group. Favoritism began to surface, creating an increasingly toxic environment. One day, Papa Wemba overheard his musicians speaking negatively about him. Unable to tolerate it any longer, he erupted in anger. In a sudden and dramatic decision, he fired the entire band and required anyone wishing to return to write him a formal letter. This explosive moment was captured on tape by none other than Awilo. Papa Wemba's decision did not sit well with older members of the band. Some had been loyal to Papa Wemba for more than a decade, only to be told that they now had to write a letter asking to return. Feeling disrespected, a large part of the musicians chose to leave. Together, they formed a new group called Nouvelle Generation, meaning New Generation, a name that also referenced one of Viva la Musica's albums. Departing from a band to create a new one has always been common in the history of Congolese music. It's a pretty typical move. Awilo's own father, Awilo Longomba, had left OK Jazz to form his own group, L'Ovi du Zaire. When artists broke away from a band led by a strong central figure, it was typical for them to establish a new group with a more egalitarian structure. And the men they were leaving, Papa Wemba, knew this pattern all too well. In 1973, he himself had left Zaiko Langalanga with several bandmates to form Izifi Lokole, where leadership was shared amongst multiple members. He had already witnessed members of Viva Musica's first generation leave on two separate occasions. First in 1981 to form Langa Langa Star, and again in 1982 where another set of musicians created Victoria Eleison. Now, the newer generation of Viva Musica was repeating the cycle. The major figures of the group, Nouvelle Generation, included singers Luciana, Fafa de Molokai, Fataki Jose, Lijo Kwempa, and Marai Marai. Guitarist Bongo Wende, Boss Matuta, Collegian Zola. And on the drums, you've guessed it. The band quickly benefited from the buzz surrounding their departure from Viva la Musica and enjoyed a wave of temporary success. They released 2 albums, both which performed remarkably well. The first one, Porokondo Zi Pompa Pompa, was a group effort with multiple composers. Awilo contributed to the track Porokondo, a song he would later revisit in his solo career. The title promoted good behavior and social responsibility. Don't harass or mistreat women, and don't make fun of your friend who may have fewer means than you. But beneath the moral lessons was a subtle jab at their former leader, Papa Wemba. Wemba was from the Tetela ethnic group, and the Porokondo rhythm itself drew inspiration from the Tetela traditional music. A simple way of saying that the new band could rival the influence of their old leader, even amongst their old leader's own people. Their second album, Station Radar, followed a different structure. All of the songs were composed by Luciana, the lead singer, continuing a pattern established during their time in Viva Musica. Also, the band adopted a streetwear aesthetic, jeans and sneakers, not only because it was becoming more and more fashionable in the West, but also as a deliberate contrast to the clean-cut, immaculately groomed, sap-influenced style of Viva Musica. This was typical for new groups wishing to differentiate themselves from the bands they emerged from. Despite their initial success, that didn't last. This too was common amongst bands built around egalitarian structure, where no single dominant leader emerges to maintain long-term cohesion and direction. As an example, when Dr. Nico Kassanda and Taboulé left Grand Calais African Jazz in 1963, the band they created together, African Fiesta, with both men sharing leadership, lasted barely 2 years. Eventually, each went on to form their own group where they could claim full control. A similar pattern appeared in 1981 with the creation of Langa Langa Star, with former members of Viva la Musica's first generation. The group was publicly promoted as the group with 7 bosses, le groupe des 7 patrons, as it was said in French. Despite the fanfare, most of those bosses had left by 1985. The story repeated itself again with Victoria Eleison, founded in 1982, and nicknamed the 12 Disciples, as a reference to its supposedly collective and egalitarian structure. Yet, 2 of its central figures, Emenea and Bipoli, quickly found themselves competing for the spotlight. In 1984, Bipoli had left, taking more than half of the band with him. However, that new band that Bipoli had formed didn't go anywhere, and some members eventually returned to Victoria Eleison, disappointed by Bipoli's lack of leadership. But by then, Emenea had already consolidated his power. Those who came back did not return as equals, but as subordinates. It is fair to say that bands formed in the aftermath of musicians leaving a monocratic system often carry a false sense of hopes, the belief that a more democratic future lies ahead. But sooner or later, egos, financial disagreements, and jealousy tend to get in the way. This is precisely what marked the beginning of the end for La Nouvelle Generation, and it set the stage for a dreadful moment that would redefine Awilo Longomba's career. La Nouvelle Generation operated with an egalitarian structure in which each member had assigned responsibility. Luciana, for example, served as the treasurer. Awilo Longomba was appointed as the band leader, a title that, to avoid confusion, did not mean that the band belonged to him or that he presided over everyone else. It simply meant that he was responsible for the musical direction and the rehearsals. The role had been given to him by the other members, partly to make him feel more valued within the group. But that was pretty atypical. Awilo was one of the youngest members, so normally, such an important role wouldn't have been given to him, considering how important seniority is in band system. Furthermore, he was a drummer. That might not seem like much, but in Congolese bands, or Zairian bands as they were called at the time, there was a strict hierarchy. Instrumentalists are usually relegated to the background and often called derogatorily Bato ya Sima, which means in Lingala, the people in the back. With the advent of Mabanga, which are basically shout-outs, it's a practice where singers are shouting out sponsors in the hope of receiving or continuing to receive money from the sponsors. The gap in importance and status between instrumentalists and singers grew even bigger, as instrumentalists obviously were not singing and therefore could not give shout-outs to anyone. This has always been a huge source of frustration for a lot of instrumentalists, which leads us to the core issue here. While planning a concert, a misunderstanding occurred between the promoter and Awilo regarding the fee they were supposed to receive. While the other band members still wanted to continue the negotiation, Awilo was against it. And that is when the unfortunate happened. The promoter angrily shouted, "Who cares about what Awilo has to say? He's just a drummer. We can find another drummer to replace him." That obviously did not sit well with Awilo, who left the meeting and refused to show up to rehearsals for the concert. To add insult to injury, as the concert date approached, one of Awilo's colleagues decided to pay him a visit, likely hoping to change his mind. The discussion did not go well, and the colleague ended up punching Awilo. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. Awilo left the group and never came back. Leaving a band like Nouvelle Generation to become a solo artist as a drummer was more than atypical. It was unprecedented. While continuing to do gigs as a drummer for various famous artists, Awilo sought out a record label, one that would allow his eccentric, atypical personality to shine. Fortunately, he didn't have to look too far. As mentioned earlier, in the late 80s and early 90s, Europe was under siege from the soukous wave, a takeover similar to what the West has experienced in recent years with Afrobeat. By the way, I think it is time for a small general lesson that would greatly benefit my friends from Anglophone Africa. I've seen a lot of confusion between soukous, seben, dombolo, and makossa in different environments. First, makossa is a musical style from Cameroon, a modernization of traditional musical culture of the Douala people. Dombolo is a Congolese dance from the late 90s with a corresponding entertaining chant. The dance became so popular that it has been used to refer to upbeat Congolese music as a whole. While soukous and seben both hail from the Congos, they are often used interchangeably, but they are slightly different. Most upbeat Congolese songs lie on a spectrum. On one end, you have seben, derived from the word seven, which originally referred to the later part of many Congolese rumba songs, usually slower, with guitar fingering that use more intervals. On the other end, you have soukous, which may be seen as a derivative of seben. Soukous has a much faster tempo. The guitar fingering relies more on speed and single note patterns. Now, it was specifically soukous that had taken over some of the countries of Europe, and that was no accident. It was part of a deliberate strategy. When struggling artists Orlus Mabele from Congo-Brazzaville and young, ambitious Jimmy Wetinu from Benin met through an acquaintance in Paris in the mid-80s, the former tasked the latter with helping him uplift his career. Jimmy did just that. After reading a book about show business, he leveraged his new knowledge to rent equipment, hire musicians, and book studio sessions. The influx of Congolese musicians in Europe played in their favor and also contributed to accelerating the decline of the traditional band system within the Congolese musical environment. Jimmy further advised Orlus on how to adapt his style to appeal to an audience beyond the Congolese diaspora, change the themes of his song, add more French lyrics, and simplify certain elements. The initially reluctant Orlus conceded, and soon experienced a flourishing career because of it. He also formed his own group called Loketo with the guitarist Diblo Dibala. His first album was released in 1986 under the Jimmy production label and became a hit. From that point on, Jimmy produced many atypical artists from both Congos, among others. When I say atypical, I mean artists who did not fit neatly within the traditional Zairian musical codes of the time. In 1994, Jimmy created a sub-label, Jimmy International Production, applying his business savviness to steer his artists toward a more global audience. And one of the very first albums released under this new sub-label was Awilo's. Moto Pamba came out in 1995, and it was an instant hit. Since Awilo was not a singer, he initially called upon vocalists to interpret his compositions, but he was eventually convinced to sing himself, something extremely atypical of a Congolese drummer. He explained that he often had to fill in for vocalists who failed to show up to studio sessions. He wasn't confident in his own voice at first, and it took time, and encouragement from fellow artists as well, before he reached that level. He also mentioned that his original plan was to continue working as a drummer, enroll in jazz classes, and try to secure gigs with Western bands. The name Moto Pamba means a simple person, but while the title evoked modesty, there was nothing humble about the impact of the album, especially across Anglophone African countries. This first album earned him the Best Central Africa Artist Award at the Kora Awards in both 1996 and 1997. Funnily enough, Awilo still had contractual obligation to perform with other musicians. And in a very atypical twist, he often stole the show simply by being recognized by the crowd. On this album, Awilo covered a song by Lutumba Simao called Daddy Petrol. Lutumba Simao was the new leader of OK Jazz, which had been renamed Bana OK after Franco's death. Simao had been a close collaborator of Awilo's father, Vicky. He also covered one of his father's songs, Mama Ya Bilamba, and featured the voices of Dindoyogo and Sam Mangwana. Moto Pamba therefore blended modernity with old school. The track Moyente used a distorted guitar, laying the foundation for the techno soukous style he would fully reveal in his next album in 1998. Success would be confirmed with the album that followed, Coupe Bibamba. And with that release, you could clearly see how he produced certain songs to appeal to different audiences. The key song, Coupe Bibamba, featured none other than the Martinican queen of Zouk, Jocelyne Berroir. Again, this was highly atypical. Congolese artists rarely collaborated with non-Congolese stars at the time. The song showcased the techno soukous, a blend between Eurodance and soukous. Even though it was common for artists to coin new subgenres, such as Creole soukous, soukous zouk, directly drawing inspiration from Western musical trend was less typical. The song Galte le Coin, one of the biggest songs of his, leans more toward the Seben style. He came up with a new version of the song Poro Kondo, one of the earlier tracks that he had composed. This time reuniting with some of his former colleagues, Luciana and Lijo Kwempa, for the vocals. And let me tell you, Karen Madoka's guitar effects were especially delicious on that version. Awilo knew about the life of an undercommitted immigrant firsthand. From the mid-80s until 1995, when he finally became a French citizen, he had to experience that life. And it's within the song Sans Papier that he was able to express some of the realities of that harsh life. Coupe Bibamba shot to the number one spot on African and European charts very quickly and stayed there for several weeks. Several other tracks from the same album followed suit. His third album, Kafu Kafu, took his success even further. The album brought him back to the Kora Awards in 2001, where Awilo was recognized for his outstanding contribution to African music and received the Judges' Special Award. And as a beautiful gesture, he dedicated his trophy to Nelson Mandela, who was sitting in the audience. In 2003, he released Mondongo, which contains arguably his biggest hit, Carolina, an ode to a girl who is, according to different passages in the song, very sweet everywhere. I want to give a specific shout out to the guitarist called Japonais Maladi. The way he plays, going in and out of the scales, and creating tension during those specific passages is absolutely mesmerizing. He's one of my favorite guitarists, so I definitely have to give that shout out. That very song was nominated at the 2004 Kora Awards. He also has the track Dance Floor, and with this track, he tripled down on his techno soukous genre. He would go on to release another album, Superman, a noticeable change in tone from the vibes of Moto Pamba. However, that album did not achieve the same level of success as the others had. Artists like Inos B and BM, Bolia Matundu, who's now known to be the executive producer of the Pop the Balloon show, stand out as atypical figures within contemporary Congolese music. Unlike artists shaped by traditional rumba systems such as Fali Ipupa or Ferregola, BM and Inos B did not emerge from established orchestra-style bands. They are true solo artists who operate without a fixed ensemble behind them. Their path is not identical to Awilo's, but their atypicality echoes his spirit. That is why seeing Awilo collaborate with both artists kind of makes me chuckle, almost sentimentally. It feels like he's extending a hand across generation to artists who, just like him, carved out their place outside of the traditional system. Awilo Longomba's influence extends far beyond the borders of Congo. When I hear African entertainers, especially in the Anglophone part of Africa, talking about him as the best Congolese musician, it kind of blows my mind. For most Congolese, I don't think he's even in their top 10. His music inspired an entire crop of Nigerian entertainers, for example, many of whom begin their careers by creating spoofs and playful interpretation or reinterpretation of his songs. His style left a mark on artists like Fumi Adams, who late 1980s Hausa language hit Yaro drew from Awilo's rhythmic energy, and Julius Agu, whose tracks Okombo clearly echoes Longomba's signature musical style. Nigerian singer-songwriter Burna Boy has also credited Awilo as one of his early inspiration in an interview on Click TV. His impact even gained international recognition. Sony Music requested a funk remix of Coupe Bibamba with James D. Train Williams for their compilation Tribute to Funk, a testament to how far Awilo's sound has traveled. In February 2023, Nigerian singer Ira Star released Stability, a techno soukous-inspired single that directly sampled Coupe Bibamba. The hit, Rosalina, also known as the Break Your Back Challenge by BM, is heavily inspired by Awilo's Carolina, so it only made sense for Awilo to appear on the remix. One of the lessons I learned from Awilo's story is how much frustration can push us to accomplish. Many of his greatest achievements were rooted in moments of frustration. For example, Awilo and the other musicians of Viva la Musica left Papa Wemba's band to create Nouvelle Generation because they were frustrated with how Papa Wemba treated them. It is because he was mocked when he was a kid that he decided to sharpen his craft and to become a renowned drummer. The title, Porokondo, was created out of frustration with the enormous hold Papa Wemba had on the market. Awilo went solo because of his frustration with how drummers and instrumentalists were treated in Congolese bands. So if you're ever facing a difficult or frustrating situation, maybe it's a sign that something good is on the horizon. Another point I want to mention. In the African diaspora, we tend to love artists from other African countries without really understanding the musical cultures that birthed them. Part of the goal of this video is to do exactly that, to bring more context. On the African continent, celebrating artists from different horizons is beautiful. When I see Ivorians, for example, talk about growing up listening to Cameroon artists, when I hear about Nigerians uplifting Awilo Longomba, a Congolese artist who barely spoke English, when Zimbabweans, for example, are blasting Pepe Kale, or when people across many African countries pay tribute to icons like Fela Kuti or South African legend Brenda Fassie, it brings me a lot of joy. I absolutely encourage discovering new artists, but I also encourage discovering the musical cultures they come from. There is a proverb found across many cultures that says, a tree is known by its fruits. It's something highlighted in the Bible and even in cultures, for example, the Zulu cultures. Well, you can see the artists as the fruits, and the trees are the musical cultures that produce them. There are many trees across the continent, and I urge you, my friend, go and explore as many as you can.